welcome everybody. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming out on such a cold night. I appreciate that. And I want to thank the Ribbon Shalom for allowing me to be here, because last week I came down with a little bit of laryngitis, and I was concerned that I would be okay to do this talk. I was afraid I was going to have to call Yaniv and he would have to do the talk for me, but in any event, Baruch Hashem, I'm feeling better enough to do the talk. So, right, took my vitamins and they helped, right? I also want to just express my accursed to this wonderful organization called Chazaq. We're all very familiar with it, and one of the things I can tell you about this organization is that they definitely have siyata d'shmaya, because it's beyond the teva what they do. To be able to do the amount of programming they do, Yaniv doesn't have a staff of 2,000, but miraculously, he's able to provide, through his organization, continuous programming, quality programming, Gedolei Torah, people from all over the world come. He unites, Chazaq unites the community. They bring us out for all different kinds of events, and we really owe them a tremendous accursed for all the wonderful things they do for Klal Yisrael. So they should have chizuk, and they should be able to continue to do the things they keep doing. And of course, I want to thank the Shul Beit Eliyahu for allowing us to use their space tonight, and for the technical crew here that are helping us out. So thank you all. Okay, I'd like to just start off with a couple of questions I'd like to ask you. Maybe before that, we'll start off with a little story. This is a story of a speaker that went to an event, and as his chauffeur was driving him there, the chauffeur turned around and said to the speaker, "You know something? I've seen you do your presentation 100 times. I think I can do it just as well as you." Okay, so the speaker said, "Really? Fine, we'll switch places." So the chauffeur sat in the back, the speaker drove him to the event. The chauffeur got up, gave the presentation, and it was spectacular. It was so good, he got a standing ovation at the end. And just as he was about to leave the podium, somebody in the audience raised their hand with a very difficult technical question. And without batting an eyelash, he said, "Just to show you what an easy question that is, I'm going to let my chauffeur in the back of the room answer it." Okay, so I hope my chauffeur is still back there. Okay. Anyway, I'd like to start off the talk tonight. First of all, you don't even know what I'm going to talk about, but I'm glad you came anyway. But just to satisfy my curiosity, I'd like to ask you the following questions. Please, by a show of hands, respond. Regardless of what your level of education is, whether you completed junior high, high school, college, master's, doctorate, postdoctorate, how many people here, through all the years of schooling they may have had, learned in school how to safely change a flat tire? Anybody? Really? Okay. A couple of people actually learned that. Amazing. How many people here learned in school, or knew when they came out of school, the difference between a mutual fund, an annuity, a stock, a bond? Anybody learn that in school? Anybody come out with that knowledge? Probably not. Okay. How many people here actually learned how to listen in school? In other words, listening is a skill. It doesn't come automatically. You have to be trained to be a good listener. And you might have learned how to read and how to write. We probably didn't learn how to speak in school or to listen, but these are critical skills that really are very important to our personal and professional success in life. Our relationships hinge on being good listeners, and nevertheless, it's something we're really not trained in. It's something we really don't learn in school. And there's a big difference between listening and hearing. Hearing is automatic. As soon as a baby is born, it hears. But to learn how to listen is really a skill. The last question I'd like to ask you is this. How many people here learned how to eat properly in school? How to have a healthy, nutritious lifestyle, how to have a healthy lifestyle? Probably never learned it. Probably never really got into it in school. And what I'm trying to point out, not to fault the educational system in any way, but there are a lot of practical, important lifelong skills that were never taught in school. No matter how many years you've been in school, learning how to eat well, how to be healthy, is probably not part of the picture. Anyway, I could help you maybe with the last part. I'm the author of a book called L'Chaim, 18 Chapters to Live By. It was written for the Jewish community. Baruch Hashem, it's been successful. People have benefited. People have changed their lives from the book. More importantly, people have enjoyed reading it because it's a very readable, practical book with stories and a lot of interesting things that people can learn from. It's based on my 25 years of experience as a clinician, as a practicing nutritionist. I have it available here for a book signing at the end if anybody's interested. Each chapter is devoted to different aspects of health, nutrition, how to get a good night's sleep, heart health, how to keep your brain healthy, how to reduce your stress, all from a Torah framework with some very nice haskamas from many leading Rabbanim. So I hope it might be of interest to you, or it might be of interest to a child, a family member, a friend, a relative, a neighbor, a wonderful gift item. It's over 200 pages, and I think you will get a lot out of it, so please keep that in mind. I have some literature that you can take at the end, some promotional literature, and also for coming tonight, I prepared a very special page on tips for healthy eating, which I'll talk to you a little bit more about. Basically, for those of you that are interested in good health and maintaining your health, there is a particular way of eating today that almost all the scientific research and studies have documented as being probably the best way of eating. Now, you know there are a lot of different schools of thought out there when it comes to nutrition, and a lot of different things that people do and try and believe in. But I can tell you, based on my experience and based on the current research, the Mediterranean way of eating seems to top the list in terms of reducing the risks of, having better cardiovascular health, reducing the risk of a lot of illnesses that are very common in today's world. So I prepared a page for you that you can take highlighting some of the basic concepts of the Mediterranean way of eating. So I hope you'll benefit from that. So that's one thing I want you to take. So what today is wrong with the way we eat? Basically, the focus of the talk today is really how to integrate diet. I don't like to use the word diet. Matter of fact, I never in 25 years of practice have put anybody on a diet. First of all, diets don't work. Anybody who's been on a diet knows they will often lose weight, but most people will regain the weight and then some. Also, if you ever looked at the first three letters of the word diet, okay, it's not such a good connotation there. So basically, I don't recommend diets, but I do recommend a healthy outlook and a healthy lifestyle. And if your focus is on being healthy, then your eating choices and the things you do will probably be better ones as well. I just want to share with you a quote in the book of Devarim. The Torah writes, "V'nishmartem miod l'nafshaseichem," which can be translated to mean, you should guard your souls very carefully. And the Torah Tamima refers to Talmudic discussions both in Brachos and Sanhedrin to elucidate how this verse in fact teaches the importance of guarding our bodies and our health. So really that's what we're trying to do. I want to just share with you one other quote. This is in the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah is citing the Shlah HaKadosh. He says, a person should eat and drink only to give support and to give health to his body, to prepare for the service of the nefesh. And by doing this, every one of his meals is a sudas mitzvah. Imagine that. If your intention when you sit down to eat is to nourish your body, so you'll enable the neshama that Hashem blessed us with to be able to fulfill its mission, right? Because the neshama needs a vehicle. It needs a healthy body. And without a healthy body, we're incapable of doing the mitzvahs. So our avodas Hashem is really contingent on having a healthy body. So we have an obligation, a responsibility to the body and to the neshama to keep the body healthy so the neshama, the nefesh, could do the avodas Hashem. And that's really why, if you think about it, why does an animal eat? An animal eats out of instinct. It feels hungry, it knows it has to fill his gut. So that's why an animal eats. A human being, though, hopefully can take eating to a higher spiritual level. And when we do eat, we should think of the main purpose of eating, and the main purpose of guarding our health is so that we should have the health and the strength to be able to serve Hashem. So if a person thinks about this before he eats or while he's eating, so as the Mishnah Berurah states here, citing the Shloh, then the actual meal becomes a Sudas mitzvah. Every mouthful, every bite is a mitzvah. And by the way, this pertains to everything we do. If we go out to exercise, what's the purpose of exercising? Same thing. To strengthen the body so we can serve Hashem. Before going to sleep at night, if we have the thought in our mind, we're sleeping now so we can be well rested, so we can get up and do mitzvahs the next day, so then even the hours of sleep become a mitzvah in itself, if we have the right kavanah, the right intention when we do these things. So hopefully, leaving here tonight, maybe we can reflect on this, and when we sit down for a meal or a snack, we can have a higher purpose in mind. Okay, having said that, I'd like to go back to just some things I want to give, tips I want to give you. One of the problems today with our eating is that we've steered away from a whole food diet. All of the cultures in the world, if we look back to traditional eating of any culture, it was always based on a whole food diet. You go back 100 years, 200 years, any part of the world you go to, people who ate their traditional diets, no matter what they were basically healthy diets. There are tribes in Africa today that still eat exclusively red meat. So you would think that they would have terrible cardiovascular health. That's the primary food they eat, nothing else, red meat. And nevertheless, they have very good cardiovascular health because the red meat that they're eating is coming from animals that are wild, that are eating their natural diets. They're eating greens, they're grazing on grass, they're eating the things they're supposed to eat. So when an animal eats what it's supposed to eat, the nutrients in the animal's body are there, and then we benefit from those nutrients as well. Nowadays, animals, we've disturbed the food chain. Animals are supposed to eat a certain way. A cow is not supposed to be grain-fed. It's not supposed to eat cornmeal. A cow is supposed to eat grass. That's the natural diet of a cow. And if you think about it, it's pretty amazing. Just by munching on that grass, a cow is able to develop a massive body. It's able to get all the calcium it needs for its bones, all the nutrients it needs by consuming its natural diet. It's also interesting to note that grass, greens, are a source of omega-3 oil. Not much, but they do have some. So when a cow eats greens, its body, the meat on its body, now contains some omega-3, which protects the heart and the blood vessels. So when a cow is not eating what it's supposed to be eating, then those nutrients are missing and we don't benefit, we lose out. So, and by the way, you can get grass-fed meat today. It's available. I'm still not advocating eating it in tremendous amounts, but if you're going to eat red meat, so you have a better source. And the grass-fed meat, from what I've seen, has less fat, has lower cholesterol levels in the meat, it has a higher iron content, it has more omega-3 than the other types of meat, so it does become nutritionally a better choice as far as that goes. When it comes to oils and fats in the diet, there's a lot of confusion. Many people think it's best to be fat-free. And many of the foods today have had all the fats removed. You can get fat-free bread, fat-free yogurts, fat-free cookies, fat-free cake. So people think those are healthy. The truth is, we need fat. Fat is an essential part of our diet. We need the right kind of fats. The problem today is we're eating the wrong kind of fats, and that's really what the problem is. The right kind of fats are found in the Mediterranean way of eating. Monounsaturated fats coming from things like olives, olive oil, nuts and seeds, avocado, fish, the omega-3 oil that's in the fish. These are healthy, essential fats. Fats are not a luxury. They're an essential nutrient, essential ingredient that our bodies need. And if we have the right kind of fats, it can protect us against certain cancers, against heart disease, and many other ailments and so on. So that becomes very important. Another problem today is the wrong kinds of carbohydrates. Processed carbohydrates, processed starches, with a lot of the essential nutrients taken out. And also too much sugar, too much salt, too much protein. Another thing I'd like to mention is that I'm looking at a book now called It All Starts With Food. In that book they mention something very interesting. Use your imagination for a second. Imagine you're going down a steep hill in your car or on a bicycle or a motorcycle, whatever you want to envision. And all of a sudden you need to apply the brakes and they're not working. No brakes. Kind of a scary feeling. Some people in the audience may have had that experience. It's a very scary feeling. Well, I'll tell you something what's happened with our foods today. There are no brakes. The food manufacturers have removed the brakes that prevent us from overeating foods. Let me give you an example. Most people here can easily eat their favorite box of cookies, am I right? Not too hard. If you like the cookies you're eating, you can sit down, polish off 5, 10, 15 cookies, no problem. A big bag of potato chips, no problem. Pretzels, no problem. And the list goes on and on and on. The manufacturers have taken the brakes out of those foods. Once they remove the brakes, meaning the fiber and the other nutrients in those foods that normally fill us, we can't stop and we can't satiate ourselves. For example, we can eat a lot of cookies, but you can't sit down and easily eat 6 or 7 or 8 apples. You can't polish off a head of cabbage too easily. You can't eat 6 or 7 sweet potatoes too easily, because those foods, the Rebbeinu Shalom put brakes into those foods. He put ingredients and mechanisms into all the whole foods that prevent you from overindulging and overeating. And the Rambam says very clearly that the main source of almost all disease is overeating, stuffing the stomach, and bad foods. That's the combination that the Rambam cites as being the major primary cause of many health problems that we see today, and in the past as well. The Rambam even goes as far to say, better a little bit of a bad food than too much of a good food. In other words, a little bit of maybe an unhealthy food in the eyes of the Rambam is better than too much of a good food. Isn't that amazing? So the best combination would be to eat less and to try to eat healthy foods. If you eat healthy foods, you'll be able to eat less, because these foods have the brakes that the Rebbeinu Shalom put into the foods. They will fill you. They will satiate you. And that's why it's important to try to stick with the right foods. So that makes the best. I'll tell you now, we're coming tonight, I'm going to give you a secret about the best exercise in the world. The best exercise in the world is pushing yourself away from the table. Okay? So if you could do that, the Rambam says, eat until you're about 3/4 full. In other words, you still feel you can eat. There's still room there. That's the best time to leave the table before you overeat, engorge, and so on. And I'll tell you, there are many health consequences to overeating. I personally know a friend who told me his father passed away. He had a heart attack right after eating a heavy meal. He suffered a heart attack. And there are a certain percentage of heart attacks that have been connected with overeating and so on. So overeating is really one of the worst things we can do. And the Rambam said this 800 years ago, and it holds true today. It's a universal truth and principle that we're first realizing. Okay, let me give you a couple of other points. The soil that foods are grown on today is not that great. The agricultural industry doesn't let the land lay fallow every 7 years like we do. It's interesting to note that every 7 years the soil gets depleted, and by allowing the land to lay fallow like the Torah commands us to do, the soil has a chance to replenish the nutrients that were taken out of it by the crops that were grown on it over those last number of years. So we can see this is a very important principle. What they do in modern agriculture today, obviously they don't stop, but they just replenish the soil with artificial chemicals or fertilizers or things to try to get things to keep growing. So we don't have the best soil and things like that. And then of course there's handling and transportation of foods. Do you know that when a head of spinach gets pulled out of the ground, somewheres in the Midwest, one day after that head of spinach is pulled out of the ground, it loses 50% of its vitamin C content. So what happens to the typical head of spinach? It gets pulled out of the ground, it goes onto a truck, into a warehouse, makes its way to the supermarket, it sits there for a couple of days. You buy that head of fresh spinach, sits in your refrigerator for 2-3 days. By the time you eat that head of spinach, it could be 2 weeks old. And then once it's cut, cooked, exposed to light, air, heating, whatever is done to it, there are continuous losses of nutrients. So even though you think you're eating healthy, and eating spinach is certainly healthy, I'm not saying you're not getting anything out of the spinach, but there's a lot that's been lost. 100 years ago, when your great-grandparents grew a head of spinach organically in the backyard and pulled it out, it was on the table that night. They didn't have refrigeration. On the table that night, and you got the maximum nutritional value out of it. Okay. So I cited some of the problems today. The truth of the matter is, we can greatly improve our nutrition by avoiding the traps I just mentioned, sticking with whole foods, trying to do the right thing when it comes to making food choices and so on, and trying to build in some of the Mediterranean principles that you'll get in that handout. Basically keeping the diet colorful fruits and vegetables, healthy fats, using meats and proteins as a side dish instead of a main dish, cutting back on sugars, avoiding white flour products, sticking with whole grains, and so on and so forth. You'll see the Mediterranean principles are very, very sound, very balanced, and they work. And the results have been there, and the studies show that they do get results. Now, I wanted to talk a little about supplements. So let's say we are eating as well as we can. We're following these Mediterranean principles. By the way, they say that frozen vegetables are probably more nutritious today than the fresh, because when they pull the head of spinach out and they're going to freeze it, they flash freeze it right away, so the nutrients are better preserved. So you may want to think of using, fresh and frozen, but frozen carry a lot of weight in today's world as well. Canned are not as good. I prefer probably frozen over canned due to the salt and sugar content, and even the ingredients in the canning and stuff like that may be a drawback. But I would say that if that's the only way a person would eat vegetables, I would say go for it. You know what I mean? But if it's convenient and you do, that's a good way to get them in. So it's probably better than not eating them. Let me just. What I'd like to do, we'll leave a few minutes at the end for some questions and comments. I'd like to talk a little about supplements now. So based on, we have these good, healthy eating principles now, as I just discussed. The question is, what role should supplements play, if any? Well, as I mentioned to you earlier, even if you're eating very healthy, you could still have nutritional deficiencies. We need many, many different nutrients on a daily basis. What they call macronutrients, micronutrients, nutrients we need in large amounts like calcium, potassium, magnesium. And then we have trace minerals, micronutrients like selenium, iodine, copper, things that we need small amounts of but we need these nutrients on a daily basis. For every nutrient you might become deficient in, if the deficiency holds up for a long enough period of time, it will ultimately lead to some disease in the body. We all know if you don't get enough calcium, it's going to affect the bones. If you don't get enough magnesium in your diet, it could affect the cardiovascular system. And if you don't get enough beta-carotene or lutein, it could affect your eyes. You could be more prone to macular degeneration, cataracts, glaucoma, and so on and so forth. So every nutrient will affect the organs in the body in some way if we're not getting an optimal amount of that nutrient. Many people today are deficient in different nutrients. And that's what I want to talk about right now. I want to just sort of conclude the talk with what I call core nutrients. What I mean by core nutrients, they're important ones, as they all are, but these are hard to get, or more challenging to get, even if you're eating well. And these are ones that people are more prone to be deficient in. So I'm going to give you a little overview of some of the core nutrients. It's not necessarily an exhaustive list, and it's just general information. There could be many things that people could be deficient in, but in my practice and based on my research, the number one that stands out way on the top of the list, vitamin D, as in David. Some people in this room may have had their vitamin D levels checked. I would assume that many people have found that they're probably low and don't have enough vitamin D. Vitamin D, they've discovered, is really not a vitamin. It's a hormone. And there are many receptor sites throughout the body, many organs and systems in the body that need vitamin D. So if you're not getting enough, those organs and those systems will suffer. Vitamin D has been linked, vitamin D deficiency has been linked to increased risk for cardiovascular disease, certain cancers, bone and joint problems, an impaired immune system, and the list goes on and on and on. And many, many things that vitamin D is very vital for. Most people are not getting enough. This is where, we'll take questions in a little while. This is where a supplement could play a very valuable role to you. Okay? I've designed some of my own supplements, and I try to be careful to include things in them that are normally hard to get. So vitamin D, for example, I have included in larger amounts in my supplements because I know it's a little bit harder to get. There's another nutrient that you're probably a little less familiar with. It's called vitamin K. Now most people, when they think of vitamin K, they think of something called vitamin K1, which is found in leafy greens. And the main function of vitamin K1 is it helps the blood to clot. But there's also another form of vitamin K which is also essential for us. It's called vitamin K2. And vitamin K2 plays a very interesting role. One of the roles of vitamin K2, it does help in the bone building process, but more importantly, the way it helps is that it keeps calcium in the bones. If you don't have an adequate amount of vitamin K2, calcium can come out of the bones and wind up in the soft tissue or in the blood vessels. And as people age, they basically turn to stone. They suffer from calcification of the blood vessels. It's a very common and very problematic condition. It's very possible that with an adequate vitamin K2 intake, it's possible that we could maybe prevent that process, maybe even reverse that process. But where do we find vitamin K2? We find vitamin K2 in animal foods, animal proteins. The problem in today's world, as I mentioned earlier, is that animals are not being fed what they should be fed, so the vitamin K2 that should be there may not be there. That becomes a problem. Some of the more common foods that have vitamin K2, they're really not so common. They're found in certain fermented soy products. There's a famous Japanese food, a fermented soy food called natto. I think it's spelled Natto. But it doesn't go too well with the American palate. It doesn't maybe taste as good, so most people really don't make it part of their eating regimen. But in Japan, it's eaten regularly and it contains a very large amount of vitamin K2. It's interesting to note that the Japanese who follow their traditional Japanese diet have a much higher or a much better level of health than many of the modern countries, Western countries do. Their traditional diet is a very healthy diet, and it does contain a good amount of K2, and they have excellent bone health, despite the fact that dairy is really not a traditional part of the Asian or the Japanese diet. Their kids don't grow up on the traditional diet drinking 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever glasses of milk a day that we're supposed to drink. And despite all the calcium that we have in our diet, the milk and the cheese and the yogurt and the pizza and the ice cream and all the calcium supplements that people swallow, our bones are falling apart. Many people have osteopenia, which is a precursor to osteoporosis, and so on and so forth. And nevertheless, in Japan, things like heart disease, cancer of the prostate, breast cancer, and bone problems really don't exist for those Japanese that maintain their traditional way of eating. When the Japanese come to this country and they adopt a Western diet, a Western lifestyle, they get the same exact diseases and at the same ages as we tend to get them. So we could see something very interesting happening there. There are certain cheeses, believe it or not, that are cultured in a certain way that they can contain some vitamin K2. One of them that I've heard of recently is something called Gouda cheese. I heard also that brie cheeses may contain vitamin K2, and somebody told me recently that Edam cheese is Edam, yeah. There's another cheese that may contain it, but I saw some sources for Gouda. It may have to be researched a little bit more, but other than the fermented Japanese foods, natto, miso may have a little bit. It's another fermented Japanese food product. Tempeh is another fermented Japanese soy food product that may contain a little bit. And then it's possible that some of the grass-fed animals may contain some vitamin K2. And then there are supplements that people can take that contain vitamin K2. It's something that I included in all my supplements because I felt, based on my research, that people were somewhat deficient in it. We are not eating fermented foods like we used to eat. People used to make sauerkraut. The sauerkraut we get today is not made the same way. Although there might be some companies out there that do make it in a more traditional way, and you may get it that way. You may get other good things from the sauerkraut, not necessarily vitamin K2, but that brings me to the next core supplement, is something called probiotics. Friendly bacteria. Billions, if not trillions of bacteria, healthy, friendly, good bacteria, are supposed to be living in our gut. Unfortunately, most people have what they call a dysbiosis. We have the bad or the unfriendly bacteria has gotten the upper hand, and the good bacteria is really not in the amounts it should be, and when that happens, it could affect a lot of things in the body. It could affect immune health, digestive health, and the list goes on and on. So I would say that, once again, this is another area where you might, in today's world, you may have to rely on a supplement. Again, I'm talking core supplements, things that you can't easily get from foods. You could eat yogurt. The commercial yogurts put in some probiotics, maybe not that much. Usually they come with a lot of sugar also and other ingredients. But there are some good quality probiotic supplements that could fill a gap for you in this area. Omega-3, another essential nutrient that, unless you're eating fish a couple of times a week, you could have a deficiency in omega-3. So either you could eat more fish, or you could maybe take a supplement if you can't eat fish, you don't like fish. There are omega-3 supplements. And the last nutrient I want to talk about very briefly is vitamin B12. As we get older, it becomes harder to absorb vitamin B12 from the foods. We have lower hydrochloric acid levels in the stomach, which is needed to separate or extract the B12 from the foods that it's in. And therefore, you can get tested, get your blood levels tested for vitamin D, for B12, and if you're deficient, you could either get B12 injections or you can get a high dose of vitamin B12 in a supplement form. You know, your doctor could maybe advise you on the amount, but if the dose is high enough, over time it could bring your blood levels up of B12. If your B12 is deficient, if you're low in B12, it could affect your cognition, it could affect your memory, it could affect your cardiovascular health, you know, many implications to a low B12 level. I even heard it said once that a severe deficiency in B12 could create symptoms that look like Alzheimer's. And it might be nothing more than a B12 deficiency, but maybe it wasn't checked. So that's why these levels should be checked. Don't assume that you went to the doctor and they did blood work and everything was checked. Many times B12 or vitamin D levels are not checked. So you have to ask your doctor to please check those. Okay, so I would say, just to wind up the talk and maybe take some questions or comments, you have the Mediterranean principles for good eating, and you have the core supplements that I just mentioned that would hopefully make your nutritional program more comprehensive. I do have some information on the table there. We'll take questions first. At the end, you're welcome to take some of the handouts I have, and you could look at some of the supplements. I also have the book there. And let's open up to maybe some questions. Before I do that, I just want to briefly announce for those that are watching, for anybody that may want to contact me with a question or a comment, they can reach me at 718-544-4036. The email address is R as in Robert, M as in Michael, Shields, SHIELDS, 62 at Verizon.net. Okay, let me, yeah.
The minimum requirement levels for K2 and for D3.
Okay, so for vitamin K2, I think the RDA, the recommended daily amount, I believe is about 80 to 100 micrograms, which is not a lot, not a lot. I have a multivitamin supplement called VitaShield, which it's been available for about 8 years. I've changed the formula 3 times in the last 8 years to try to keep up with the latest research. I currently have 60 micrograms of vitamin K2. Also, I want to let you know there's different forms of vitamin K2. There's something called MK4 and MK7. MK7 is the natural form, and it stays in the blood for a longer period of time than the MK4. So that's the one I used in the supplement that I formulated. But so you're not looking for a lot, but the recommended daily amount is about 80 micrograms. Okay, and vitamin D, right now the recommended daily amount, the RDA as they call it, is 400 international units, which most experts believe is way below what it should be. I can't really advise you on what would be an optimal range for you because everybody's different, but if you get your blood levels checked, your doctor may be able to advise a program to get your D levels up if they're low, and then you have to think of a maintenance dose. I would say that 800 to 1,000 IUs of vitamin D might be a better range to be in. Some people may require more than that. It all depends on how well you absorb it and how it might look on your blood test. In the one-a-day that I have, I do have 1,000 international units of vitamin D3. Keep in mind the D3 is better absorbed than the D2. So that's what you're looking for in a supplement D3. And I want to just mention one other thing. I've seen some research, which I want to continue to research, that taking a lot of vitamin D without having the K2 could be a problem also, because they all work together. See, a lot of times we just focus in on single nutrients when there's always a synergistic effect with nutrients and, working together, and sometimes you can create an imbalance or create more of a problem by loading up on one and not recognizing how they're dependent on others. So things like calcium, magnesium, D3, and K2 all work together to build bone and to keep calcium where it should be. That's why I created a bone formula that contains all of those nutrients to try to make it more comprehensive and give it more of a synergistic effect. Okay, someone who didn't have a question or comment yet? Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
Is K1 or K2 potassium, or it's not?
No. Potassium is what we call a macro mineral. It's a mineral that the body requires in very large amounts. As a matter of fact, the body requires the largest amount of mineral in the body is really potassium. The requirement is something like 3,500 milligrams a day, whereas calcium is only about 1,000 milligrams a day. So we need a lot more potassium than calcium even. But it's a very important mineral as well for cardiovascular health and blood pressure regulation and so on. Okay, any other questions or comments? Alvin.
Question about the probiotics.
Yes.
Acidophilus is one of the most common ones.
Right.
Right. According to the label which is on the bottle, it says to take 2 of them like a few times a day. In my experience, it's a heck of a lot too much. Whether I do it, I used to do it rather, was when I got a bad stomach because of gas, and I take one of those like once a month maybe. Then I found that the Chol and Shabbos morning gave me a bad stomach. So every Shabbos morning I take one. Once a week, in other words, and that seems to work. So what's the label on the bottom? On the bottom it takes so much more.
Okay, I understand your point. Again, when it comes to supplements, it's very tricky to tease out exactly what you're going to need and what's going to work for you. Sometimes a little trial and error there. Obviously, again, you got to put things in perspective. The foods we eat, the quality of the sleep that we get, the exercise that we do is the ikr, and the supplements are the tuffle. I mentioned core supplements because I don't believe in people taking a lot of supplements. I'll just tell you a story. In my practice, I once had a man, anytime I counsel anybody, I tell them, bring in whatever supplement you're taking. I want to see what you're taking. So one guy came in, it's a true story, I think I wrote it up in my book also. He came in with a suitcase. He put it on my desk, he opened it up, there were 40 bottles in there. So the first question I had for him is, how long does it take you to swallow those pills? He said, I spend 20 minutes a day. Imagine 20 minutes sitting down every day and swallowing pills. And then it piqued my curiosity. I had to see what he was taking. So I looked at every bottle. And I'll just tell you one thing. He was taking a green tea supplement. You know, the green tea leaf ground up into a powder in a capsule. So he had a green tea supplement. He was taking a garlic supplement. He was taking fish oil supplement. He was taking ginkgo biloba. His doctor also had him on aspirin. Now, does anybody know what those things all have in common? Blood thinners, right. So I said to him, do you know that you're taking a lot of things that thin the blood? Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with having the blood a little thinner, anti-clotting, things like that, a little bit of garlic. Beautiful. But I said, you're taking a lot of things that all have the same mechanism, including the aspirin that the doctor gave you. And he said to me, you know something? I've been having a lot of nosebleeds lately. And he even told me that one time he had such a bad nosebleed, he had to go to the hospital. And even in the hospital, they had trouble stopping it. They had to insert a balloon in his nose and blow it up to prevent the bleeding, stop the bleeding. So I said to him, well, that's, you're overdoing it. I would cut back on these blood thinners. I would let your doctor know what you're taking, and I would even get like a clotting, there's a blood clotting test you can get to see how quickly your blood clots and so on. So all I could say is many people do self-supplement. They read something in a health magazine, they go into a store, somebody tells them this, and before you know it, every week they're coming home with more bottles. What I try to do, or what I advise people, is to be very prudent when it comes to supplements, to really just try to use them in a sensible way to get, good quality supplements. Less is better than more sometimes. That's why I've tried to modify or update my formulas based on the research. Either I lessen ingredients or I increase ingredients, that kind of thing. But really, that was the main purpose of my talk tonight, is to focus in what I think are some of the core things. Many other things you can get from good food, if you're choosing better foods, you could satisfy a lot of nutritional needs through a better diet, but there are areas that I mentioned: probiotics, vitamin D, K2, omega-3, and B12, where people could fall short, and this is where supplements may help fill an important gap for you. So, but you're bringing up a good point. Any other comments or questions? Yeah.
Things working synergistically for bone health. Like, are we still growing bone? I thought that...
No, you are still growing bone. Every 7 years you get a brand new skeletal system. And the truth is, bones are living tissue. They're not rocks in the body. Bones are constantly the bone cells are dying, bones are constantly being worn out, worn away, and the body is constantly regenerating bone tissue. In order for you to build healthy bone tissue, regardless of what age, or to slow bone loss, there are nutritional factors, there are exercise factors that can help you with bone health and bone density. Okay, even weight-bearing exercises at any age, as far as I know, will increase bone density. Okay, when astronauts go up in space, they come down, they see they've lost bone mass because they're floating, there's no gravity, there's no force on the skeletal system. So we need a certain amount of force on the skeletal system to help build, for better bone density, and we need the right nutrients to help build healthy bone tissue, and that's where vitamin D, the K2, the magnesium, calcium, and then there are many trace minerals and protein and even vitamin C that all play a role in the complicated rebuilding of bone. The lights are shining on me. I can't see in the back. Is there anybody in the back there that has a question? I can't see your hands, so if you want to just... anybody behind this light back here? Okay, it's in all the foods that most people eat every day unless you're vegetarian. It's in fish, chicken, meat, turkey, eggs. It's in dairy products. But even though you're eating these foods every day, you can still be deficient because, as I said, as you get older, there's something called intrinsic factor, a certain mechanism in the stomach, the hydrochloric acid, that extracts B12, and if you don't have enough of that, you could be deficient. So your doctor should check your levels. Also, keep in mind that there's a range on B12. It starts maybe down in the lower 200s. It may go to 1,000 on the lab test. You want to be at least in the middle of the range. If you're on the lower end, it may not be that great either. So you want to get a little bit higher up in that range. Yeah. In foods? Okay, so it's not in that many foods. I mentioned certain cheeses, certain fermented soy products, animal proteins, meat, chicken, things like that, but because of how animals are raised nowadays and without the right foods in their diet, whether the vitamin K2 is really there is questionable. The body can sometimes convert, I think, the vitamin K1, which you get from leafy greens, into K2, but you may not get enough of a conversion to give you the amounts that you might need. So a supplement may be important. The only people that have to be a little bit cautious about vitamin K, either K1 or K2 or any kind of K supplement or even K in foods, is people who are on Coumadin, because vitamin K's are antagonistic to the drug Coumadin. So if you're taking the drug Coumadin, you have to really be very careful and discuss with your doctor about your food or vitamin intake when it comes to the vitamin K vitamins.
Turmeric also, or
I'm sorry?
the turmeric, the spice,
Yeah, what about it?
would that be a factor as far as the cumin goes? Because I think it contains cumin, right?
No, turmeric, that's a different thing. I'm talking about the drug Coumadin. You know, it's a blood thinning drug. Yeah.
What about a pregnant woman? What type of vitamins do they use?
Okay, so if somebody is pregnant, they should really be in touch closely with their doctor. The doctor should hopefully, suggest a good quality prenatal, and the prenatal should also contain some omega-3 fish oil. I think they might recommend the DHA, but you should look into that with your doctor, and it should be at least a good prenatal with some either fish oil as part of it or a separate omega-3 fish oil that would be appropriate for someone who's pregnant. I would say when it comes to wild or farmed, wild would be a better choice, although they say that even in the farmed, I know there are problems with farmed fish, but they also still have the omega-3 content, so you might be able to argue the point that the benefits may still outweigh the risks even in farmed, but I would still be, I wouldn't go overboard with the farmed. I would try to use more of the wild when you can. Most of the canned salmon, maybe 80% of it is wild, where most of the fresh salmon you buy, about 80% of it is farmed. So, but the main thing is to get different kinds of fish in and to try to eat more fish. Tuna is the only one I caution people about in terms of it being a higher mercury containing fish. So if instead of eating the tuna you switch to sardines or salmon or mackerel or herring or some other kind of fish to replace the tuna, those would be probably better choices to avoid the mercury. Alvin. Give me one, because there might be others. Okay, go ahead.
Just mention the tuna fish. The reason why that the largest fishes, such as tuna, contain so much mercury is because they live the longest. They get to be the biggest. Therefore, they absorb more energy from the water. Ocean floor because they're around so much longer to absorb so much.
Right, and it's a bigger fish, right. Okay. Let me just, I just want to see if maybe we can conclude. I want to just conclude on a certain note that I was thinking about today. This is a little bit of a switch in topic. Again, I'll be around at the end for the book signing for anybody that might be interested, or questions on the supplements. There are handouts there. There are 3 handouts. There's a card if you want to contact me. But I'd like to conclude on a different note. We're all very aware of the terrible tragedies that are taking place in Eretz Yisrael every day. I don't know how it couldn't affect everybody in some way. Heart-wrenching tragedies. And I recently heard a talk from Rabbi David Goldwasser, and he said that a lot of times we feel helpless in what we can do, but the truth is, he said that even a small act or something we take on could make a difference, a big difference. So I'd like to conclude by having us maybe think of something we could do. I'm talking something on a spiritual level It could mean maybe some extra learning. It could be an extra kapitel Tehillim you say during the day, giving extra tzedakah, shmiras halashon, anything you could think of, anything you can do. Don't think it won't make a difference, because it will. Chesed, I would try, I'm just going to ask that we all contemplate for a little while now before we leave some extra mitzvah, something we could do that would be a spus for our brethren in Eretz Yisrael. So I'm hoping before we leave we can just all make some commitment to something, davening with more kavanah. You pick something that you feel you want to work on or do, and I think that would be a good way to conclude this talk. I want to thank everybody again for coming. I'll be here. I'm going to go over to the table over there for anybody that wants to talk further or might be interested in the book or any of the other information that we have on the table. Okay, thank you again for coming out. All the best. Good.